Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Leadership in Construction podcast. I'm your host, Michael, and today I am joined by two guests. I'm joined by Joe Wheatley and Zoe Hawkins, who are founders of the company In Good Company and are leadership coaches and trainers. And this week, we're going to talk about the coaching model, which is the GROW model. So, Joe and Zoe, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Thank you very much. And I have to say, you're looking very professional with your podcast mics. I'm sort of laying the side down. So, I definitely need to upgrade and go and get a really great podcast mic. So, look, well done for looking the business, for sure.
Thank you. Yeah, these are new because we've got our own podcast coming out in November. So there are new toys. It would be a shame not to use them for your show today.
Fantastic. No, well, you can tell us all about your new podcasts in a bit. One, I would just love to get to know you a bit more and just understand sort of your background, each other, how you've come to know one another, build your company In Good Company, and how have you got into coaching. So, Joe, do you want to take the lead?
Okay, yeah, thank you. So Zoe and I actually met when we were doing our HR masters at uni, and we supported each other throughout our HR careers. We worked in separate organizations, and we decided when we had young families that actually we'd had some coaching ourselves, and we thought, I want to train to be a coach. This is the part of HR that I really love and enjoy. And so we did. We both trained with separate training organizations. And from that, we decided that we wanted to set up on our own. So I can remember being in the back bedroom at Zoe's house, and that's where we created In Good Company, which for us represents a deep passion for everyday well-being and mental health. And we felt lucky that we came across coaching, but that was through our HR careers. And so how do we enable more people to have access to high quality, world-class, ethical coaching practices? And so we also could only coach a certain number of people one-to-one. Whereas now with the training part of our business, we train coaches all over the world that can go out there and also support people, whether it's in the workplaces, around their leadership development, but also with their emotional well-being and development too, so that they have those two things hand in hand. So we're celebrating 10 years in our business this year. And it's not... Thank you. And it's not always straightforward. We've learned a lot along the way. We've had years where we've been really successful and we've loved our work and we've forgotten about the business development. And then we now feel that, with the community that we've built, it's just amazing to be part of a community of like-minded people that are passionate about being the best that they can be, helping themselves, but also supporting other people to be the best that they can be in their role and in their life. In the wider roles, leadership is one aspect of who people are.
Absolutely. And certainly sort of very friendly, very approachable people. And that was sort of what was drew myself to reach out and to get in contact with yourselves. And Zoe, do you have anything you want to add as well to that?
No, not really. I mean, Joe's covered it well. I think probably what we don't share as much of is that probably through coaching and the skills that we've developed over the years, that enables Joe and I to have a really strong business relationship. I mean, we were friends long before we went into business together. And, we have a natural kind of chemistry together, a very deep friendship. But it wasn't until I suppose that we discovered coaching that it really helps you to have a
great self-awareness and a deep understanding of human behavior. And so, Joe and I, when we have our friendship, we also have this business relationship, which enables us to challenge each other, disagree openly with each other, healthy conflict, debate, support, encouragement, vulnerability. Like you can bring it all into the mix. And I think in many respects, we are leaders in our business, and the way that we have our business relationship, that is because of the leaders that we are. And we've only been able to create that strength through coaching. So I think, I suppose everything we've learned over the years, we role model within our business, and also with the people that we train as well.
No, I think I'm really glad you brought that up, really, because, as you say, you were friends for a long time before that, and then I've seen it before. It can be tricky to then transition into then business partners as well. But you're saying you think of coaching because there's this slight sort of stigma around if you become a leader or you get promoted into that leadership role, all of a sudden you've got to become that boss. Certainly in my area, you've got to be seen as authoritative. You've got to, apply the pressure when you can. And that's where it sort of leads to you sort of stop being friends with your sort of peers because you've been promoted to these other areas. So it's important. It's really interesting to hear you sort of say that coaching style that you've learned has enabled you to maintain a strong friendship, but also have a really strong business relationship as well, because that's essential when you're trying to lead in any organization or trying to run your own business as well. So fantastic. Thanks for bringing that up, which sort of leads me into really why I thought this was important that we have this conversation, because we've talked about coaching on this podcast before. And I'm sure people sort of heard my sort of background story. But when I got into a leadership role, and I thought it was very much command and control, apply the authority, that's when I started to lose friends and started to, people stopped turning up to meetings, and it sort of went a really downward spiral. That I discovered leadership and what role that could play in my sort of day-to-day life as well as in my career. And one of those aspects was this term of coaching. And I'm still very much new to what coaching is, but I sort of saw it as asking more questions than you answer, because I was very a bad person for driving a leading conversation to get to the results that I want and not what the other person, and trying to derive a solution based on what I wanted it to be, rather than asking questions and understanding other people's perspectives and viewpoints. And these are the really essentially what we need to consider as we sort of become leaders. So can I ask then to sort of educate us in terms of what coaching is and what coaching is not? Who wants to go first?
Sure. Oh, wow. I was just going to say, Joe, why don't you pick it up? And then I realized I already opened my mouth and started talking. Joe, why don't you start and I'll pick up.
Okay. I'll have a go and you can build on it. So we tend to think about coaching and mentoring as being on a continuum, with coaching at one end and mentoring at the other. So coaching in its purest form is non-directive. So as you described, Michael, lots of, you're asking questions. Obviously the coachee is going to be talking more than the coach is going to be talking, or, the manager who's using coaching skills, or the leader. And then on the other end of the continuum, we've got mentoring, where traditionally you might think about that as giving advice rather than asking questions. Our view is actually that great mentors are also great coaches. And I think the important thing is to know where you are on that continuum when you are in a conversation, and making sure that wherever you choose to be is in service of what the person in front of you is looking to achieve from a conversation. The way I describe coaching with my coaching clients is that coaching is about understanding where you are now in terms of your situation, your goal, your life. It's about understanding what small or significant changes do you want to make or do you want to achieve. So think about that as the goals. And then we go into the past, so things like values and beliefs, insofar as it is relevant to helping that person achieve their goal. And so you've got coaching, mentoring, counselling, consultancy. They've all got dotted lines between them. I don't think they're hard and fast boundaries, but the important thing is that we operate in our area of competence. That's a really key ethical piece. So if people are looking to develop coaching skills, start, Michael, like you're doing, reading, listening, researching, and maybe you'll decide to join a course as well, in order to embed and have a safe place to be able to practice the development of these new skills. So what would you add?
Yeah, I just think, I guess, from the perspective of leadership coaching and being a leader in an organization and using a coaching style, I think the first thing to do really is to really check in on your listening skills, because as a coach, the one thing I think that differentiates a coaching conversation from any other is the way that you listen. Now, typically in everyday conversation, when we're listening, we tend to listen to respond. So we hear what the person is saying, and in our head, we're kind of running the conversation through in our head thinking, oh, what my God, that's useful for this person. What could I say? Or, oh, I know what they're up to. They're doing X, Y, and Z. We're having an internal dialogue whilst the other person is speaking. And we do that in all of our relationships. In a coaching conversation, really, one of the things that you're doing is suspending all that internal dialogue and purely listening to what the person is saying, not from a place of needing to respond or guide or fix or offer, but just to hear what they have to say. And then when that person's finished talking, you might have an observation that you would share, or you may have a question that emerges, or something else. But the quality of listening that takes place in the workplace is often very, very poor. Even if you think you're a great listener, you've probably still got a lot of work to do. And so I think as leaders, when we can suspend our judgment, suspend the need to offer a solution, and we can purely listen to what the person in front of us is saying, we are so much closer already to a coaching style. So that's probably, an extra build I'd offer.
Yeah, so you're listening to ignite. So you're listening from a position of, I believe that this person in front of me has everything they need in order to be able to achieve what they want, or they can find it. And I think a key part of coaching is being able to put your ego to one side, in terms of being the feeling that you're the one that needs to be the expert in absolutely everything, and being frightened that if you don't give an answer, that people will think, well, why are you in that role? And I think an important part of that is to be able to understand and learn about what your personal leadership style is, and be able to have conversations with your stakeholders, your team being one aspect of that, about what your leadership style is and how you engage in conversations with people, and the rationale behind that, so that it can also, you can be transparent, but also open to feedback. So at the end of the conversations as well, you're asking them, how was that for you? What's the learning for you? And also being able to share what the learning is for you as the leader from that conversation. Because as a coach with my coachees, I describe the relationship as a co-created learning environment. So coaching is very much about having conversations when you're stepping into a particular mindset.
That's really brilliant stuff. I think you're absolutely right, especially around sort of listening side of things. And that's the trap that I fell in, is I listened to respond, try and pick up on the bits that I agreed with and bits I didn't agree with, and rather than listening to understand. And you're right, I don't think we practice great listening as much as we probably think we do. So what are the sort of skills that we might be able to employ when it comes down to sort of listening? More listening to understand than listening to respond?
I think one of the things that we all need some help with are some really bad habits that we fall into. So rescuing is one thing that we see a lot of. So take a situation where a direct report walks into their manager's office and is just really struggling with something, and they get emotional, and the line manager can see they're getting emotional, and what typically happens is they try and shut that down, because they don't want to open up the space to emotion, or they don't know how to handle it, or they they just want that person to not be sad or not be stressed, or so I think courage is a skill that leaders need, to be able to trust that when a person is experiencing emotion, that they are resourceful and whole, and it's usually a point in time at which they feel emotional. And if you can create a space where somebody can just be emotional, and you're not judging them for that. You're just listening to what they have to say. And then as that passes, you can ask a question, which is, how can I support you? Or what do you need right now? I can see this is difficult for you. How can I help? That's, you don't need to worry for the person, because they are whole and resourceful. So I think that's important from courage, is trusting in the other person. So that would be with emotions. And I think also, when we really listen to somebody, we can also use that person's language. So somebody walks into the office and is like, oh, I'm really confused about project X, Y, and Z. Typically, someone will interpret what they have heard and play it back in their own language. Whereas in coaching, using the other person's language is really helpful. Tell me more about your confusion would be a great question to come back with. So picking up on what the person has said and offering back to them, because it shows that you really genuinely are listening and you're curious. You want to learn more. So I think curiosity is a skill that all leaders can bring more of in spades, really, to be able to more deeply understand the people who are coming forward for help.
Yeah, that's a key thing, I think, is if you're listening just to respond, you're missing out on the subtleness of the wording people use, and sometimes in the way that they use it. And sometimes I think if you're, like we are a lot now, working over Teams, you can almost pick up the tone of someone's voice a lot clearer, because you can't physically see their voice, see their face, so you're not looking elsewhere. You're just listening to their voice through your earphones, and you're sort of picking up on the tone and perhaps even a bit more of the words that they're saying. And for those that are not sure about it, it makes a massive difference picking up on their terminology and their tone of that. So I mean, I think that's great. And in terms of like for coaching, so when you listen to sort of leadership, people talking about leadership and what is leadership, people say we want to make this environment, a safe environment for people to be able to, open up and not be judged and feel like they can really bring their best selves. And so, well, how do you create that environment? How do you do that? I think coaching as a style of having conversations is partly one of the ways you do that, because coaching is very much about holding the silence, being comfortable with not being the first one to speak. It's letting the other person have process time to be able to go through what they're thinking about. And if they can do that in a way that you're not waiting for them to say something and to judge them on it or to pick them up on it, I think it was one important aspect, one important step in order to being able to create that environment. And as an example, I deployed these skills throughout my career and have found that people, even though I don't work with them anymore, will still come back to me to just bounce ideas off, because they know that I'm not going to be there to impose my own thoughts on them and tell them this is the way you should do it. It's not command and control. So I'm just going to sit back and let you process your thoughts and think about it. So I wanted to pick up one more thing really around coaching just before we move on and talk about the GROW model, which was around, Joe, you were talking about it's like on a slight spectrum, coaching and mentoring. Very much when you start to have a conversation with someone, certainly when I do this, and I won't sort of explain if this is the right thing or how you build upon that, but as I'm starting a conversation with someone and I'm listening to what they're saying to me, I'm judging and trying to determine throughout the start and in the process of that conversation, what style of conversation do they need? Do they need me to be a mentor right now? Do they need me to be a coach right now? And I think that's important, because if you get the wrong style of conversation for what they need, the conversation won't land in the right way. Is that accurate, do you think?
I think what you're talking about is how you build rapport with another person. And we often talk about meeting the other person where they're at. So I think you need to think about the context. How much time do you have and the other person to have the conversation, and being clear about that? If somebody comes to you and says, there's an emergency down there, we need to make a decision whether to do this or this. If you then start to take the time to have a coaching conversation, that might just be a complete mismatch. Whereas if somebody comes to you and they want a solution, you can say, well, look, I've got time. We can talk about this now, and I can help you identify what solutions there are and which one you'd like to take moving forward. Does that sound like it would be helpful to you? So there's a permission piece, I think, within this, which goes back to the transparency. So it's what we in coaching call contracting for the conversation. And I think a lot of leaders think that coaching takes a long time, and it doesn't. So initially, in the first place, it might take a little bit more time as everyone gets used to the new style. But actually what it does is it saves time in the longer term, because people won't keep coming back for solutions all the time, because you're going to grow their confidence around their knowledge, around how they identify solutions, how they're thinking, what that means, how they lead others, because, leaders are leading others. So we need to think about that role modeling piece. And the grow model is one way in which you can be transparent about having a semi-structured coaching conversation, and you can actually guide, offer that, invite somebody to have the conversation using that model. So you could say, okay, so I hear that you're in this situation and you need to make a decision about this going forward, and you're not sure what decision to make. That sounds like that's the goal from our conversation today. And they say, yes. Okay, how about we experiment with going through and exploring what things are like for you at the moment, what opportunities there are, and then, I'll support you to identify the best way forward for you. Does that sound like it would be helpful? And they say, yes, that's it. That's exactly what I want. That's great, because then you can relax as the leader, because when you're familiar with the grow model, and we've got a download that's got a whole load of different questions you can ask at each of these different stages of the grow model, you can relax and be more present with the other person. And that's when you can notice the areas where they're nervous, the areas where they need a bit more support. So you can understand them where there might be a good opportunity to give a personal example, which might help them to bounce off and create some more options for themselves. So it's there isn't a one size fits all approach with coaching, as there aren't with other things. The most important thing is that you are in the conversation, present, noticing things with the other person, and agreeing with them how you're going to use the time you've got for the conversation.
Yeah, and I think the key thing that you picked up on about there is time as well, because a lot of us, certainly in the construction industry, when you're a leader, you sort of fill your time up with trying to solve problems for the people, and you don't realise that you're actually taking that upon yourself. That's not something that, because they're incapable of doing it, you don't feel like that person can do that bit, which speaks volumes to the people, because it just sort of sounds you don't trust them to do it.
Yeah, and I guess so. Another way to look at this is, if as the leader, when somebody comes to you and they want some support, because that's the only way they know to be. That's what they've been taught about the culture of the organization, perhaps, which is like a parent-child kind of culture. So the leader has the authority, you must follow. So therefore, you need to get approval for what you're doing. That can often breed a kind of inner dialogue for the leader of, I'm okay, you're not okay. And if you enter into a conversation thinking that you're okay as the person that gets to make the decisions and the other person isn't, that's going to influence the space you hold for the other person, the questions that you ask, and is going to take you down the mentoring side. And that's what will take more time ultimately in the longer term. So if you can actually enter into a conversation from a kind of a mindset of, I'm okay and they're okay, as Zoe mentioned earlier, they're adults, they are, resourced, or they can get the resources that they need, then your questions are going to be different, and you'll be able to keep more at the coaching end, which is when you're asking open-ended questions. And with the help of the semi-structure, like Grow, you can really help people to become response able, so able to make their own responses.
I'd build that coaching also has some brilliant side effects of building people's confidence, building people's motivation. So if you're in a habit, as Joe described, of I'm the manager, I give the solutions, you're my direct report, you go and execute, that can be quite disempowering in terms of encouraging people to use their initiative, encouraging people to take risks, encouraging people to step up and, take more responsibility. When people come into a conversation and they come up with their own solutions and are supported and encouraged to go and carry those out, that creates a different self-fulfilling kind of cycle, in that it builds everybody's confidence. The line manager gets more time back. Their conversations become more about checking in on, so last week you agreed you were going to go and do X, Y, and Z. How's it going? Yes, going really well. Do you need any support with anything? Actually, I'm a bit stuck on this particular part of the project. Okay, what do you need from me? Actually, it would be really helpful if you could have a conversation with X for me. Okay, no problem. Rather than, have you done it yet? Why haven't you done it yet? You're not doing it this way. I asked you to do it like this, but what I'm seeing is you're doing it like this. It's just a totally different like chemistry that you create together. And whilst it may feel unnatural and uncomfortable to start with, the more you do it, the more you will see that your relationships get stronger. You will feel more empowered. Your employees will feel more empowered. And it's just, I believe it's a better way to do leadership and to do business.
Well, absolutely. And I think those two examples that you just gave was exactly what I was sort of trying to get to, and the sense of, as you say, empowerment. Because as I say, about time, the more that you can create that support network and empower people to, you feel confident enough to feel work that they believe in themselves to work out the solution for themselves. As a leader, gives you more time to focus on the leadership side of things, which in itself is a day job.
Yeah.
So we'll go into and talk about this coaching model, which is the GROW model. Zoe, do you want to start off? What does the GROW model mean? What is it about?
Yeah, sure. So the GROW model was first developed by a guy called Sir John Whitmore. He's got a great book on this. I think it's called Coaching for Performance, if any of you want to go and take a look at that. And it's a semi-structure for a coaching conversation that leads you as the coach through different key areas of the conversation to help your client get, or your direct report get, a really good outcome. So it starts with goal. So G stands for goal. And that really is about setting an intention for your conversation. So what is it that you would like to get as an outcome from this conversation today? So typically that might be, I need to be better organized for this project that I'm working on because I'm struggling with, the time, for example. Or it might be, I have a conversation coming up with a client next week and I need to feel more confident about that conversation, whatever it might be. But you're basically, as the person who's coming, you want to get them to think about what outcome do they want from this conversation. And you might ask questions around how important it is to them. Why is it important to have this goal now? What will achieving this goal enable them to actually do that they're not doing now? So getting real clarity around what that goal is. Then once you've got a clear goal for your conversation, you'd move into what we call the reality phase. So R stands for reality. And that's where you're really exploring what is happening now in your world in relation to this goal. And the reality is a really important phase of the conversation, because most people jump from what do you want to achieve to how are you going to do it? They miss out naturally this reality phase. And in this reality phase, you're talking about what are you struggling with? What have you tried? What's worked for you in the past? What strengths, resources, qualities do you have that have helped you with similar things before? And as you spend more time in this reality phase, your direct report, your client, the person you're speaking to, gets more and more connected with ideas and courage to be able to go and tackle their goal. So a really great exploration, spending a disproportionate amount of time in this reality phase, can really help people to unlock their creativity, because the next phase is options. It's the, so what could you do about it? What's your low hanging fruit? What's the first obvious option? What's your wildest, craziest idea for being able to solve this challenge that you're up against? And that phase is without judgment. You're not kind of saying, right, here's an option, great, I'm going to go and do it, which again, typically is what happens in conversations, is someone will say, oh, I suppose I could go and speak to Joe, and they'll go, brilliant. When are you going to do that? The options phase is brainstorming, essentially. It's getting down lots and lots of different ideas. And then as you kind of empty out the ideas, you move into the next phase, which is about will or way forward, and start to think about, okay, so of all those ideas that you've just created, which one do you want to do? You know, which of those options are you committing to do? And then you'll help the person come up with a plan of how they're going to execute on those actions, and then check back in with the goals. You go back up to the beginning. So at the start of this conversation, your goal was X. Where we've got to now are these actions here in Y. How do you feel about that? So there are lots of things you can do to build sophistication into that. But fundamentally, following each of those phases is great. In reality, as you get more and more experience of this, you won't have a linear conversation. So it won't naturally just go GROW. You might go GR back up to G when you realize that the goal isn't exactly what you wanted it to be, coming back down. And then when you start to generate your plan, you might come up with some new options you hadn't thought of. So it's not necessarily going to be linear. But if you can touch on all four of those phases of a conversation, you're likely to have a really powerful conversation. What would you build, Joe? What have I missed out?
Well, and all of that can be done in quite a short period of time. You know, you could have a great conversation that in 10 minutes or even 5 minutes, once you know what the structure is. And I also think that in that way forward, when they're making a decision about what action they're going to take, it can be really useful to explore how might you sabotage yourself. And I think some people, and then you build a plan around that, obviously. Some people, it is really important to kind of get prepared for a grow conversation, in the sense of what mindset are you as the leader, but also what mindset are you going to encourage and nurture the person that you're talking to get into before you go through this conversation? Because otherwise they could be in a mindset of, well, I can't get resources. Yeah, well, I would, but I can't get the resources. And, you know, obviously with things that are happening out there in the wider environment at the moment, you need to both set yourselves up for success if you're going to invest the time in these conversations. So, you know, preparation, the transparency of the grow model means that once the person in your team or you're talking to understands how you're going to support them using the grow model in conversations, they then can start to think, that's the thinking process that I could actually take myself through before I then come to my manager or my leader. And then maybe they'll start off by coming and saying, look, I've got this situation. This is what I'm looking to achieve. This is the situation at the moment. These are the things I've thought through. And so I'm thinking about doing this. And then that's a very easy one then for the leader to say, that's brilliant. Great. I understand what you're thinking, what the situation is at the moment, what you're trying to achieve. Yep, I go for it, and come back and let me know how it went. And so that can kind of permeate down through the organization, empowering other people. And if the outcome initially that the person has come to, the leader thinks, that isn't going to be helpful, of course they'll say, that's interesting, thank you for sharing that with me. Shall we just unpick a bit of this together and explore this a bit more? And so, you know, they can engage in the conversation, still using the grow model, but also being able to share some of their insight to stimulate other options. So, you know, those are some of the realities that leaders will face, you know, in organizations, and how you might then use it. So rather than panicking, because that's what happens to a lot of people, I think, is when a team member comes and talks to them, they can often go into panic and think, I don't know how to deal with this conversation. I don't know. So if you can think, right, what have I got in my toolbox to be able to help us together in this conversation? Because the grow model isn't the only coaching conversation semi-structure that people can use. There are also other models called Clear, called Oscar with a C. There's an Oscar with a K. There's all sorts of different models, and people can access demos of those also on our Inga Company YouTube channel. So it's not, coaching isn't Grow. Grow is a tool that you can have in your broader coaching toolkit. Yeah,
I think that's a worthwhile sort of check that. Yeah, coaching isn't just this one model. It's a whole. It's a style, and it's a whole different. There's different models that you apply to sort of different situations. What I liked about what you just said as well around the Grow model is about being able to take yourself through that process in a form of self-leadership. And I think that's important as well. That's that when I first came across this and I was watching your YouTube video around the Grow model, that's what I sort of thought. First of all, I was like, I could use this almost on myself. I could take myself through this process to arrive to a way forward before I need to go and speak to someone else. And I think that's right. I think a lot of conversations I have with people are just really down to a sort of a confidence issue, as opposed to I really don't have an answer. And if you can, as part of a coaching conversation, hold that space and create that sort of environment so that they can talk through those options. Because, as I say, I think you mentioned earlier that through this Grow model, you have on your website, you can download questions, and I downloaded that because for me to start out these conversations, I'd be a complete novice and I'd be really nervous, unprepared with what kind of questions can I ask if they come up with something. So having those questions, like a cheat sheet, are brilliant.
I think that the greatest leaders are those that help the people in their team to be able to learn how to coach themselves. So when we think about succession planning, and we know that, people are struggling to recruit at the moment. So succession planning is, more important than ever. So how do you nurture people that are coming through your organization? And as you were saying, Michael, like this model can help people if they go through it themselves, even it gives them the courage that they can articulate what it is that they're looking for. So often when we ask people, how do you need to be supported? People don't really know because they don't really get asked. And it can take quite a long time for them to think about, like, how do I really need to be supported? Because people, I think human nature, people complain about their managers. That's part of the general conversation, in society. But we need to also take responsibility for thinking about what support do I need, and then being able to articulate that to those that are managing us or leading us. And this can be really helpful to get people in touch with that.
It's not just one-to-one either. I mean, I think typically what you see in organizations are meetings that might last kind of 2 hours and get nowhere with no decisions and no action points. And if you took a concept like Grow and overlaid it to a meeting structure, then it's going to make your meetings and the time that you spend in meetings so much more efficient as well. So you start the meeting with, right, why are we here today? And that might be by the end of the meeting, we need to agree on such and such. What is our goal? Brilliant. Let's canvass opinions in the room. What are we doing now that's working? What are we doing that's not working? Get everybody to be able to contribute all the thoughts that they're keeping in their head that they can share in the open space. Brilliant. Now that we know that, what options have we got? No debate, no judgment. Just let's get all the options out on the table. Excellent. How should we progress then? What does the most obvious option look like for us? It just makes your meetings so much more focused. So it doesn't just have to be contained in terms of one-to-one. You can role model, purposeful coaching behaviors in lots of different places in organizations.
And also people know what the expectations are of them, because a lot of people will be nervous having conversations with their leaders or their managers because they don't know what's expected of them, and that they have that fear of judgment around it. So if they know that we're going to be using that, they know where they can contribute well and where they feel confident about that.
Yeah, and I think that's really important thing you said, and I like the bit that you've picked up about this can be used as a model in a meeting as well, because I've done it exactly myself. And as you say, where people then that know when they can chip in, particularly on meetings, because you do have those people that just want to sit back in meetings and just let the meeting happen, and those that feel nervous about chipping in. So you only hear from about less than 50% of the meeting room, if you have that opportunity, that point at which everybody's going to be allowed to contribute, get their say, doesn't an options part, which can be wild options, can be sensible options, can be out of the box. You get it from everybody, and that's when you get the bits that you need. And other people say, "Oh, I didn't think about it from that way," but then can build on it. I think that's absolutely fantastic, and I think it happens more so now that we have a lot of meetings over Teams. Is that you can just quickly get on a call. And I've found myself in meetings for about 20 minutes. We've just been talking about the problem, and we don't know really what we're trying to solve here and how we're going to do it. And this is why I think where leadership really comes into it. If you can be bold enough to sort of say, right, we've got to really have a direction for this conversation. So what are we trying to achieve? What are we trying to solve? And map your ways through that. What are the options? Ask some silly questions. Okay, what if we did this? Why can't we do that? What's holding us back? And that's the reality part. Challenge what we would probably say in the construction sector about the reality is sort of challenging the scope, challenging the brief, challenging the constraints. Because half the times the constraints, we self-impose those constraints. They're not really constraints. And when you take those layers off, you think, well, actually, it's not really that big a problem to solve. We could just, look at this from a different perspective. And I think that is where it really comes into its own, is when you're absolutely right. When it's a one-to-one coaching session, you might find that it's probably more typically those, as you say, you're trying to have a succession plan. You're typically leading those on a one-to-one basis, those who are going to be coming in behind you and going to be becoming the next sort of leaders in that sector. But when it's a team, it really does help to open up that floor to get absolutely everybody's input. And I think you said it, Joe, that it sets up that expectation of what that meeting or that conversation is going to be like. And it takes away from that unsurety and that judgment about that conversation. So I think all of those things you picked up on are brilliant.
It helps you to stop getting stuck as well. Like Joe and I will find ourselves doing it. We will have spent 10 minutes kind of in a conversation, and then we might be like, what's the goal? Like, let's just go back a step. What is the goal that we're trying to achieve here? So it's almost like having a mental checklist of being able to know, where are we? Everyone will get stuck somewhere at some point as they're trying to work through something. And it's useful when everybody knows kind of a model like Grow or some other meeting structure, somebody can chime in and ask that question. Like, hang on a minute, let's just go back. What were our options? How come we're struggling to move forward and agree here? What have we missed? Let's just go back up. And everyone can be eyes on the agenda, eyes on the goal to help you get to the outcome. It will save you so much time when you, when you have that coaching approach in mind, to make sure you're working through each of the different phases.
And the Grow model is a conversation for change. It is about something happening as a result of that conversation. And that reality phase plays an important part, because people need to have their current situation acknowledged. Mm-hmm. They will not let go and move forward until there has been some sort of honouring and acknowledgement of the situation that they're in. And often once they've been heard, like whether it is, but we haven't got these resources, or, we don't have the budget for that, there's always a solution. But if they're not heard or acknowledged with those things, they probably won't let go. And I think it's important to understand that from a general change perspective, and also how that fits into, that's one of the purposes really of the Grow model.
And that comes back to Zoe's point about the reality part being so important, I say, not skipping straight to, problem solution sort of thing. Absolutely. Sorry, Jay, you can see.
Yeah, well, and the same with goal. Like, people think, oh, it's easy. Yeah, I know what my goal is. But what we find when we're training coaches is they realize they need to spend more time defining what the goal is, and to be prepared, as Zoe was describing earlier, that you don't necessarily go GROW, but you might find actually this is too big. We're talking about something that's very vague. So the more specific that people can get with the goal, the more useful the conversation will be, and the greater, the positive change that will result in it. And our passion around using coaching tools and approaches is that it creates positive and sustained change. in organizations, in teams, and in the wider world in which we're in. So, and also when we think about, mental health is a real challenge in the construction sector. It's one of the sectors we know that where people are struggling the most. So I think also there is an important ethical responsibility of leaders to be able to think about, how do we change, just start by changing the conversations we have, to contribute to changing the culture within the organizations, to be more supportive and acknowledging of people's challenges that they're facing, that they want support with.
Absolutely. I don't think I could put it better myself. Thank you, Jo. Just as a final bit on the GROW model, so the G is all about setting goals for that conversation. It might be too broad, but I suppose my question is about the SMART objective, so the acronym SMART, and one that I've recently been introduced, which is the AIM SMART. Do you use that in the establishment of goals at the start of the conversation, or is that just too broad, too specific about goals? Or would you try and model the goals based on that?
You can do. I think you would incorporate elements of it. So I think the SMART objective is for when somebody isn't very clear on their goal. And so you can take them through something like SMART to help them get really clear on what their goal is. Yeah. Of course, once you've got a clear goal, then you can do a great coaching conversation on it. I think the important element that we see when setting goals from a GROW perspective, the goal is focused on what you want, not what you don't want. Okay. So what we often see when people set goals is like, oh, I just don't want to be working in X anymore. Okay, it's great to acknowledge what you don't want, or I just don't want to be stressed anymore. Like, I'm just so stressed, like I just don't want that anymore. So what do you want? Like, what is the outcome that you do want? Tends to be the SMART elements tend to come at the end when you've got your actions. So once you've been able to establish, okay, so what I do want is to feel more calm. I want to feel relaxed. I want to be able to focus. Great. So we're going into this conversation in order to help you achieve more focus and a greater sense of calm. Yes. And then at the end, how the person you're speaking to might do that would be, I'm going to schedule an hour over lunch where I step away from my computer and I go for a walk and I listen to a podcast. Great. When are you going to do that by? I'm going to start doing that from Monday, and it will be between 12 and 1. So you see how you get your kind of time scale in when it comes to your actions. So the GROW model, kind of the topping and tailing of it, tends to incorporate all of those elements of SMART. So when you get to the end of your coaching conversation, really what you want your client, the person you've coached, to be walking away with are some really clear, obtainable actions that they feel a 10 out of 10 committed to, in terms of the energy that they've got behind actually making those actions happen.
That's really interesting. That's why I like that SMART acronym, because it gets you to the, how is that measurable? How do we know that we've achieved that objective or not? And I think that's quite important. So that's it. That's really fantastic and interesting stuff. I do really appreciate you for sharing all your insights around the GROW model. So for those that want to know more about the GROW model and want to go and see and watch a video about the GROW model in action, they can visit your YouTube channel. What's the YouTube channel name?
It's In Good Company. And we also have a vlog, so you can look at all of our coaching vlogs. We do a video every single week. So we've currently got like 54 videos on our website. So it's www.igcompany.co.uk/vlog. And if you scroll around there's a demonstration of Jo and I coaching the GROW model. And that resource that you mentioned earlier, Michael, is 70 questions like mapped against the GROW model. And you can get that by visiting www.igcompany.co.uk/grow, where you can download that resource and start using that. And as I said, also take a look at Sir John Whitmore's book, which is a much fuller explanation of the GROW model and how he intends for it to be used.
And also you can join us on the Coaching Crowd. It's a free Facebook group that we run. So we post these videos in there on a weekly basis, and people ask questions about using coaching tools and techniques. And there's ourselves and also a community of about 1,400 other coaches and aspiring coaches that will also, give you ideas and tools and resources to be able to support your growth and learning, because we really want to make coaching tools as accessible to as many people as possible.
Thank you ever so much. So thank you for sharing that. And your podcast you mentioned about is coming in November.
Yeah, our podcast is coming out on the 15th of November. So it's, aimed to kind of talk more about what coaching is, what coaching isn't, how do you get involved in coaching, some different tools and resources. So you can start listening in at that from 15th of November.
Brilliant. And that is going to be called the Coaching Crowd. So it will have the same name as our free Facebook group. And really, the name of it is to really convey the fact that it's a really supportive community of people. We love the diversity that's in our community, and we welcome people to come and join, or even just watch. Not everybody feels comfortable to comment in groups, but actually like to just see the resources and then go off and have a look. And we will continue to build on our resources week on week to help people as much as possible.
That's brilliant. I mean, I'm part of the Facebook group, and I think it's brilliant, the bits and pieces that I get from that. And I'm absolutely 100% going to be listening to the podcast when that comes out on the 15th of November. So, I mean, this has been a really fantastic conversation. I can't thank you enough. So we're going to have to bring this podcast to a bit of a close. But before we do, there's just one final question I want to ask you both, which is the question I always end the podcast in, which is, what do you think is the most important aspect to leadership? Zoe, do you want to start off?
Okay. God, it's a really big question, because I think there's so many elements. But for me, when I think about the leaders that I've most admired and worked with throughout my career, it's about that human element. It's about modeling vulnerability and having the courage as a leader to be able to say, I've had a hard day today. I'm really struggling with this project that I'm working on. I've had to really, grind my brain muscles today, and I'm feeling exhausted. How are you all? Like opening up a safe space where people can be vulnerable, where there's no judgment. Like no one's then looking at that leader and thinking, God, he's letting the side down, or can't believe he's struggling. It's just about like, we all do, right? So let's not hide it. Let's not cover it up. Let's make it okay that we can say when things are going really well and when things aren't, because I think in creating, a common space where that's acceptable, people aren't going to struggle so much with their mental health, because on the days where they're challenged, it's okay that they're feeling challenged, because in the next day they might have a great day, and it's okay to share that too. So for me, I always say being a leader is just about being a really great human being. Like there's nothing complicated about it. You just need to strip away all the stuff that you're trying to prove and actually just be a really nice human being who cares genuinely about others. And that for me is what leadership is.
Agree more. Joe?
Yeah, well, obviously I also align to that as well. I think for us, we talk a lot about courageous and compassionate leadership, because those are the two elements in a nutshell that probably summarize that. And I think, leaders it's really important that leaders are very self-aware and understand, where they're coming from when they communicate with others, when they are with others. And they need to have a commitment to continued personal and professional development, because that's the heart and the root to accessing all of these things. I think leaders are futuristic. So there's a responsibility there to be able to look into the future and see the future. And when we think about the future of leadership at the moment, it is courageous and compassionate leadership. As human beings, not human doings. They're people that need to be able to communicate with heart and head on a one-to-one and in a group perspective. And, that's obviously with a view to achieving whatever the organization or the teams need to be achieving. And that's with a learning perspective. So blame-free, creating an environment where it's natural and actually expected that not everything is going to go to plan. And it's how we are actually when we're in conflict and how we are in adversity that really show the true depths of leadership that an individual has. So making sure that you've got a support network as a leader around you that will enable you to do those things. So when you're running out of energy or you're running out of optimism on a particular day or hour, because it can change, that you know who you can go to, whether that's a coach and or a mentor and or colleagues. So start with that self-awareness and know that there are lots of people out there that really do want to support you and to see you and your teams do well.
Thank you ever so much, Jo and Do. Thank you for your time, and I really do appreciate you imparting all your knowledge around the Grow model and coaching. So thank you ever so much.
You're
Thank you,
welcome.
Michael.
Thank
It's been
you.
great connecting with you today.
Thank you.